Hello, everybody. Hello. Hello, Terrence. Thank you, and thank you for the Chamber for hosting this event, having an opportunity to say a few words. As you heard, I won the coin toss, which I attribute to the years I spent at the Michigan Lottery. I was able to be lucky. I haven't been that lucky with actually buying lottery tickets, but hopefully that'll happen at some point. Well, I wanted to again thank everybody for coming out. I also want to recognize my wife. She's she's right in front of me. How are you? How are you? Actually, this is a very special day for us because actually today is our 20th wedding anniversary. Today. So I knew obviously we're coming to our 20th anniversary, and I said, honey, I want to make this really special. I'm going to take you to the Grand Hotel up in Mackinac Island, and we're going to celebrate this, right? And what could be more special than being at the Mackinac Conference for an anniversary? So, but it's great to be here and have an opportunity to talk a little bit about my vision going forward. And I'm certainly humbled to be running for the U.S. Senate, but look forward to having an opportunity working closely with all the members of the Chamber, working closely on business issues, moving Michigan's economy forward. You know, I've been spending the last the last year now, traveling all across this great state. That's been part of our listening tour, listening to folks and issues that are of importance to people. And certainly the number one issue without question is getting Michigan's economy moving forward. That's what I've focused on since day one as a member of the United States House. It's been about jobs and opportunity, particularly in the greater Detroit area, but really the entire state, because that's how we're going to move our economy forward and making sure the middle class families have their opportunity to get their piece of the American dream. I'll mention a couple issues that I'm working on right now, and then I want to open it up for questions because it'll be a lot more fun having some interaction than just hearing me drone on. But one issue in particular that I focus on is really transforming Michigan, which I think is one of our incredible opportunities, is transforming it into a transportation hub, logistics hub for the region as well as for the entire country. You know, if you think about where Michigan is positioned, and if you look throughout human history, if you are a state or if you're a locale, if you're a city, and you're located on an international border between two major financial centers, you flourish. That has been that way throughout human history. And you look at where our position is as a state and as a region, right between Chicago and Toronto. There are incredible opportunities. It's why I am a strong supporter of the new international bridge crossing, and I certainly applaud the Chamber for being such champions of that as well. We have to make that a reality, and right now I'm engaged in working with the federal level, working with Senator Stabenow and others to make sure that we get funding for the plaza. As you know, the Canadian government is fronting most of the money, which is wonderful that they're doing that, but we need to have a customs plaza that will house U.S. government officials, and in my mind, that has to be paid for by the federal government to make sure that that project goes forward, and we're going to continue to aggressively pursue that. The other thing that I've also been focusing on is a new rail tunnel, which I think is absolutely critical for us too, between Windsor and Detroit. You know, we have an old rail tunnel that was built back in 1909. A lot has changed since 1909. And one of the most important things is railroads now have the double containers that no longer fit through that tunnel. We have to build a new tunnel there, make us a logistics center. It'll be incredible opportunities for us as a state. And then my real dream is then after we do that is to convert that old tunnel into high-speed passenger rail. And one thing that I'm committed to do is to make sure that we can try to get funding so we can have a high-speed rail corridor from Chicago to Detroit to Toronto. It would be absolutely transformative. Jobs that would be created from the construction of that as well as the bridge. But this is about jobs going forward for many, many years going forward. I've also been focusing a great deal on the auto industry, of course. I am co-chair of the bipartisan auto caucus in the House, and was intimately involved in the auto rescue, and I'm proud to say that auto rescue has been a great success thanks to what's happened with GM and Chrysler. We should all be very proud of that, and I think that's going to be a big difference. We're going to talk about that in a campaign. It's certainly a difference between where I am and where my opponent is, where she would not have supported that rescue, which I think you can't be a senator from Michigan and not support something that is so important for our number one industry and really the lifeblood of who we are in the auto industry. But having said that, let's look at where we're going to move forward. And for me, that's all about innovation. It's about entrepreneurship. I also co-chair the House Caucus on Innovation. In fact, I just had a panel at Tech Week, which was down in Detroit last week, where we had folks from all over the country descending on Detroit and all the exciting stories of what's happening in Detroit, particularly innovation at Detroit Ventures, for example, with what's happening there. In fact, if you close your eyes and you walk into Detroit Ventures and open it up, you think you're in Silicon Valley, but you're not. You're in Detroit, Michigan, and it shows you what we have going in our state, which is great. In fact, talking to a lot of the tech folks who were coming in, even from California as they came in, they talked about that this is really like Silicon Valley was years ago, when people actually talked to each other and cooperated and all tried to help each other. That's not the case in Silicon Valley so much now. It's much more silos as we go forward. So those are things that I'll work on. I think I'm going too long already because I want to open it up for some questions. But I just want to say a little bit about my philosophy, and I think I've shown that through my work in the House as well as in the state legislature before that. I spent 20 years in the investment business. I come from a business background. I'm a business person. And when I come to public service, I want to bring that approach, which is really about just practical problem solving. It's about rolling up your sleeves, trying to find some common ground. I'm as frustrated as I think everybody in this room with what you see in Congress, where you see too much finger pointing. You see people making everything a political issue, as opposed to trying to figure out what do we have in common. And actually, when you boil it all down, we tend to have more in common than we have differences, and yet we don't focus on that. So I'm about bringing people together in a bipartisan way. I've worked in a bipartisan way. In fact, we just passed a bipartisan bill through the Senate after we passed it in the House on a unanimous vote. So we can do things on a bipartisan way, which actually reduced some regulation in the auto dealer space. And I think we got to simplify things, get rid of outdated regulations. I was a champion of that. We were able to get it passed. But to me, that's really the essence. And I think that's what the people of the state of Michigan want in a senator. That we want to make sure that someone's going to Washington, passionate about the state, shares the values of middle-class families who are struggling each and every day, but someone that'll hit the ground running from day one in the U.S. Senate. You know, when we go to the Senate, we've got 49 other states with senators that are fighting aggressively for their state and for resources for their state. We need a U.S. Senator that can do the same thing, that has the experience, has the understanding, and has the passion to stand up for middle-class families in this state. And that's what I look forward to doing. I hope to earn your support. Thank you so much.
I'm Sarah Meisner, and I know that to many of us in this room, fostering an environment in the state where small businesses can grow and thrive and continue to provide jobs, that's important to many of us. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences supporting small businesses and what your vision would be to continue to provide leadership or growth for small businesses in the state?
Yeah, great. As I mentioned briefly in my opening comments, I do think that's really the heart and soul of what's necessary for us to move forward. Is we've got to support the small businesses that generate most of the jobs. As important as the auto industry is, and I'm a passionate defender of autos and manufacturing and believe that that's something that we have to protect and foster growth. We've got to be able to diversify and get into small business areas as well. But one area that I've particularly focused on, I serve on the Financial Services Committee in the House, and one area that I've focused on is financing for small business, particularly after the financial crisis. It was very, very difficult for small businesses to get the loans that they needed to start a business, to grow the business. It continues to be very tough for a number of small businesses, also depending on what areas that they are in. So seeing that, I worked and actually authored the State Small Business Credit Initiative, part of federal legislation that passed that provided state economic development agencies with money, including the MEDC here. And I worked with the Snyder administration on that as we looked for funding for those kinds of programs around the country. I successfully got it into law. We provided resources here to the state of Michigan for that kind of work. And I'm happy to say that the amendment that I authored has created resources for the MEDC to use that has been credited with creating 6,500 jobs here in the state of Michigan. There have been over 50,000 jobs created all across the country with the State Small Business Credit Initiative. And in fact, I was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Secretary Liu, the Secretary of the Treasury, came out to look at one of the businesses that got funds from my amendment. It was Detroit Stamping, a small stamping plant in the city of Detroit. Had a very difficult time getting loans to put a new stamping press in. They were able to provide that. We were able to provide that funding to them, and they created 60 jobs. And in those 60 jobs, I think 40 to 50, around 45 of those jobs are going to be Detroiters as well, folks who need good paying middle-class jobs. So we need to replicate that as well. I've now introduced legislation to basically evergreen that kind of fund because we've seen the incredible success that we're having around the country, helping those kinds of businesses with either collateral support or capital access programs to be able to continue to fund that. The other area that I think is important for small business, particularly I mentioned the innovation, the innovators as we go forward. For example, supported the research and development credit that passed in Congress a couple weeks back. I actually broke with most of the members of my party to vote for it, because I think it's absolutely essential that we give incentives for companies to put money into research and development to create more jobs. The problem with the R&D credit by itself, however, is that it only goes primarily to very large companies that have large tax bills. And so I think half of all the companies are $1 billion plus. My concern are those small entrepreneurs, those innovators, the ones that you see in Detroit at Detroit Ventures and other places. They aren't paying income tax, so an R&D credit doesn't do much good for them. So what I've introduced is legislation that says if you're a small company, 5 million or less in resources, have only been in business 5 years or less, you can use an R&D credit against your employment taxes. And that's something, they all pay employment taxes. We want them to hire more people. They're going to pay employment taxes. They can use that credit. If they're investing in research and development, use it to reduce their employment tax, which will create more jobs, plus it'll allow them to free up even more resources into R&D and therefore create more jobs. So those are the kinds of things that I work on regularly. I'll just tell you in closing, as I've been traveling all around the state, one of the things I do, I always do a Main Street tour, because it's, for me, every town that I've been going in all across the state, I want to talk to those business owners that are on Main Street who are struggling and want to know how we can be helpful, because that's going to be how we move our state forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman. Anyone else?
Congressman, my name is Fred Hoffman. First, thank you for celebrating your anniversary with us all today. We're
right.
happy that you're with us.
That's nice. Thank you.
I share your passion for the auto industry, as you know, and want to say thank you to you for the key role that you played in helping to save the auto industry in Michigan and save the jobs in Michigan. In that vein, can you talk a little bit about public-private partnerships and about how that saving the auto industry taught us a number of lessons as to how we can work together, with government being not necessarily the only force at the table, but one of the seats at the table, but government as well as universities and private companies and NGOs and others all at the table to help create jobs?
Well, yeah, I think that is ultimately one of the best roles for government, is to be that kind of partner, bring those kinds of partnerships in, and really leverage private capital. I think the example that I just gave from the state small business credit initiative is an example. I mean, there's federal money that backs up some of the guarantees for those loans, but it's banks that are providing those loans. It's private capital that's providing those loans, but it frees up, just in Michigan, it frees up hundreds of millions of dollars of lending that wouldn't normally be put into the private sector, but it comes from the private sector. It's not government resources, not taxpayer money. The taxpayer money, though, leverages the ability to do that, which I think is so important. But you mentioned the auto industry. The other thing that I think is critical is that we continue to be on the cutting edge of producing the next generation vehicles, so that Detroit and the Midwest continues to be a world leader in autos. You know, I'm very proud of this region. I'm proud of our industry. I'm proud of the incredible intellectual capital that we have, particularly when it comes to engineering talent that resides in the auto industry, not just the big three, but all of the wide network of auto suppliers as well. A statistic I love to tell my colleagues in Washington is that we have more engineers per capita than any other region of the country, which gives us an incredible competitive advantage. So then how do we leverage that, to your point about public-private partnerships? And one way that I think would make a great deal of sense, and one that I've gotten a great deal of support both from industry and from labor and from environmental groups, it's pretty rare to get all three of those all on one piece of legislation. But we've introduced the Advanced Vehicle Technology Act, which will create some of these kinds of partnerships when it comes to fuel efficiency to create those next generation vehicles. The act changes the way government has done things in the past, too. I don't believe on just picking a certain technology. I think that's a real mistake for government to try to do that. What it does is it changes the rules to allow the science and the technology to drive the process, and it lets the market be the determiner as well. But it allows those resources to really leverage private sector coming in, particularly smaller auto suppliers, and that's where really most of the innovation occurs. It's those small companies, those small startups, and you want to see even more dynamism in the Detroit area and throughout Michigan if we are able to do that. So that Advanced Vehicle Technology Act, I think, will do that. I've been able to get it through the House once. I didn't make it in the Senate, so we need a couple senators over there that are going to work to make that happen. But as I mentioned, it passed by a large bipartisan majority. It had the environmental groups, it had the industry groups, it had labor. Those are the kinds of things that I really focus on. in trying to find creative ways to leverage the incredible skills and talents we have in this great state of ours. And it's all about middle-class families having the ability to have the jobs of tomorrow.
Congressman, I just want to make sure we get as many questions in, so if we can shorten up the answers.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
So
Just a little bit.
now you're reminding me of my wife, so I know that.
Lindsay,
This is my anniversary, isn't it? I'm gonna-
Yes, Sarah McClure. A few years ago, you voted for cap and trade, which some feel would be particularly detrimental to Michigan. What is your current position on cap and trade?
Well, I think it's a broader question of how we deal with climate change and what is going to be the best way for us to do that and deal with carbon emissions. I think climate change is an issue that we have to deal with. I think the science is pretty clear that we have to deal with it. Now the debate has to be what is the best way to go forward. My personal view is the best way to go forward is really to incentivize these new technologies, new alternatives that are coming online to deal with reducing carbon emissions. To me, that's really the best way to go forward. And Michigan is in a very unique position to do that. I think we can be very excited about it. In fact, when I taught at Central Michigan years ago, and actually I did a panel with folks from industry all across Michigan that were involved in some of these technologies. And actually the title of my panel was, "Is Climate Change Heating Up Michigan's Economy?" Because it actually has the potential to do that. And I'll just give one example of a company and what kinds of things that we can be doing and why we need to have federal policies to continue to foster this. Now the example is Dow Chemical Company. When you talk about Dow Chemical, a lot of folks think about an old world chemical company, but they're actually a leading cutting-edge environmental technology, new cutting-edge alternative technologies in solar and geothermal and insulation. I was at their house in Midland not too long ago, which they have a house in their neighborhood, and I believe it costs roughly 15% or so more than the average house. But it uses these new solar shingles that the Dow has. They're not the solar panels. They look just like shingles you would see on your house. Very aesthetically pleasing. It had geothermal, it had insulation, all the stuff the company makes. And this house uses zero energy off the grid. It's a net zero over the course of the year. Now sometimes it uses energy, Nancy. Sometimes it uses energy. My friends from DTE and consumers. It uses energy and then sometimes it puts it back on the grid. But what's really transformative, they're saying in the next few years, they're going to have houses that generate more power than they use. That is transformative to think your residential house will generate more power than it can use. And then, of course, I have a good idea what we use the excess power for, and that would be plug in your Detroit-made car into that vehicle, whether if it's a Chevy Volt or whatever it may be. So you can go out and have your house power you, ability to go down and get a gallon of milk at the store as well. So those are the kinds of things that we can do. We can do it here in Michigan. We've got the abilities to do that. We've got companies that are doing it that are incredibly innovative. And if we're going to deal with climate change, which I believe we have to, let's do it in a way that really transforms economies in ways that creates hundreds, thousands of middle-class, good-paying jobs in America, not outsourced overseas. That's what I would do.
that was a little better, Gary. Just a little bit better.
These are big
But
questions.
you can do better.
Big
Lindsay,
questions.
we have a couple people right here in front. Oh, I'm sorry.
Good morning.
Good
My
morning,
name's Tom Short, and I'm wondering what your position is on the way the federal government taxes corporations, especially on their foreign profits.
On foreign profits? Well, I'm a believer that there shouldn't be any incentives to basically outsource. So that's what you're referring to, where you can have basically lower tax rates for doing business overseas. I don't believe that. We would need to be bringing money back. Any kind of tax reform has to be focused on domestic companies investing in domestic plant and equipment and workers. And I would really like to tie those kinds of tax benefits in particular to where those jobs are located. And if jobs are located in the United States, then there are tax benefits for companies that are dealing in the United States, investing in that. In fact, I have proposed legislation to help us along those lines. It's pretty simple legislation. Right now, a large company has to report every year how many employees they have. I want to take it a next step further and say, I want to know where your employees are. So report how many are in the United States, how many are in China, how many are wherever it may be. And that way, is from a public policy driving standpoint, we can get a better understanding as to how our tax policies are influenced. To me, the one overarching goal of tax policy has to be enhancing the ability to hire American workers and invest in American plant and equipment. And I think that's a step in order for us to drive the kind of tax policy that I think is critical for our country. How's that for a short answer?
That was great, Gary.
A big question,
Jason.
so sorry if I put the good.
Dana DeBell here. I was wondering, you've talked a little bit about bipartisanship and some of the things that you've been able to accomplish in a bipartisan way. If you're elected to Senate, what are some of the things that you will look to, what are the opportunities that you see for bipartisan and Senate and House agreement on issues that we can move forward that'll help Michigan continue to move forward?
Yeah, and I think, and I mentioned partisanship in my opening, is to me that's where we have to go as a country. We have to restore faith in our government as well. The public opinion polls for Congress aren't real high right now. I think there's a number of diseases that are more popular than Congress right now, so that's not a good position to be in. And part of it is the bickering that we have and the fact that we aren't getting together in a bipartisan way. I always strive to do that. We'll continue to do that in the Senate. It's a big reason why I want to go to the Senate, because I think it's absolutely essential that you have people in the United States Senate that are looking at ways to work across the aisle. I have done that with, I mentioned in my caucuses, the auto caucus, which I've expanded dramatically as the new co-chair. I have a Republican co-chair from California. Traditionally, the auto caucus were a bunch of Midwestern folks, which to me didn't make much sense, particularly as we went through the auto crisis. It was pretty clear people around the country didn't understand how important the auto industry is to manufacturing, and manufacturing is important to everybody in the country, that we needed to broaden that, and we needed to do it in a bipartisan way. So I have 65 members of that caucus now. Half are Republicans, or Democrats rather. That's half and 2 Republicans. That's not good. That's not good math. So half Democrats, half Republicans. And coming together from some common ground. The bill that I just passed regarding reducing some regulation for auto dealers came out of the auto caucus to work together to do that. But I think we have some of that common ground. I'm working right now with Cory Gardner, a Republican out of Colorado, to reduce the deficit and deal with cost cutting, which we have to do. We have to put the federal deficit on a sustainable course. It's not sustainable now. We've got to reduce some spending. And there's some common sense things we can do. In fact, the GAO comes out with a report of programs that should be cut. We want to have hearings on those. They don't get hearings now. We also have bills that we've authored to have mandatory up and down votes on some of these cuts, which can save tens of billions of dollars. And those are things that I feel very comfortable working with Republicans on the other side of the aisle, and I think we can build some bipartisan consensus to do that. Our focus just has to be on practical problem solving. And I'm not naive about this. And when I went to Congress, it was more partisan than I had feared when I first got there. But I have been able to navigate that, work in bipartisan, find the ways that we can make that happen, and we'll continue to do that in the Senate.
All right, we have time for just 2 more questions. Jason.
Good morning. Jeff Smith, right over here.
Where?
Over here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This here.
My question is regarding public education in the city of Detroit. So what kind of programs or processes are you backing to help promote and strengthen public education in the city of Detroit?
Well, the one aspect, and a lot of that, as you know, is done at the state level, but the one area that I have always been passionate about and want to make sure that we're protecting in the city of Detroit, as well as all core urban areas, as well as all across the state, and that's early childhood education. To me, that is the most critical thing for us in education, is to get in very early with these children. So the Head Start program, which I believe is probably the most successful federal program in my mind, ever. Every dollar we invest in a young child before they get into kindergarten has about a $7 return to the taxpayers. For the accountants in the audience, they'll like that, but also from a basic human element. It's just the right thing to do to help these children who are coming from sometimes very, very difficult backgrounds, as you know. But if you're not put on that path early, it's very difficult to ever get back on that path. The statistic is so clear when it comes to reading that if a child is not reading at the 4th grade level, by the time they're in 4th grade, they will never read at grade level, no matter how much intervention is done later. It's very rare that a child is able to catch back up to where they should be. Those are very frightening statistics. So we have got to focus very early with young people. That's why I was so dismayed with the sequester, the way it passed, where there were just these across-the-board cuts. I believe we have to have cuts, and I talked about some cuts with the bill that I'm working with a Republican from Colorado. We've got to do that, but we've got to do it in a thoughtful way. And a thoughtful way is not cutting it so that tens of thousands of children are no longer in Head Start, that are no longer getting that opportunity. Yes, we're saving money in the short run, but we are losing so much money in the long run by not making those kinds of investments. So my passion has always been that. It continues to be in the city of Detroit. It'll be my passion all across the great state of Michigan, that any child who qualifies for that should be in that program, because it's going to make a world of difference to them and a world of difference to our society.
Last question, and you need this one to be a little shorter. Just a little bit.
This
Little-
should be,
little
this
short.
should be a short answer.
Yes or no?
Yes. My name is Fern Espino, and I'd like to know, back to the proposed bridge, how you're going to influence the release of that money, and in what time frame?
Well, we're working very aggressively to do that. In fact, I had, working closely with the administration, I invited Secretary of Homeland Security Johnson to come in to Michigan just recently. In fact, thank you to the Detroit Regional Chamber. They hosted the event. Senator Stabenow was there, other folks were there. It was very important for me to bring in the Homeland Security Chief. And we also, not only do we have the Homeland Security Chief, we also had the Commissioner who's in charge of Customs and Border Patrol. These are the folks that are going to have a big say as to how we allocate money for that plaza. They came in, I took them on a tour, we toured them around, both the current facility, where the new facility is. We had a great panel, great participation from members of the Detroit Regional Chamber as well that made the case. I can tell you they went away extremely impressed and understand the importance of this investment, not just for Michigan, but for the whole country. This is a national investment. And so I think what we want to do is we want to get that kind of pressure with the administration, but also we need to have some criteria. You know, back to some of my points that we've got to have more common sense and practical business kind of sense as to how we allocate money. The bill that I've introduced says that when we fund customs plazas, and we do on a regular basis, it should be based on the amount of traffic that actually occurs at that site. They should get priority. And if you look at it based on priorities, the Windsor Detroit border crossing was number 2 on that list. Number 1 is Laredo, Texas. Laredo, Texas just got funding for a customs plaza. So take number 1 away, now that puts Detroit number 1 with this authorization legislation. And then actually Port Huron is 4 on the list, but they would be number 3. So Port Huron is there as well. Port Huron needs one of these customs plazas as well. So this should not be, and there have been some folks saying this is Detroit versus Port Huron. It is not about Detroit versus Port Huron. This is about Michigan being ahead of everybody else in the country because we're number 1 and number 3 on that list. We should be getting both of those plazas funded. And that's why you need to elect a U.S. Senator that's going to go and fight that battle and make sure it makes it a reality. And I commit to you, I'll do everything I can as the next U.S. Senator to make that a reality. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate it.